Hi everybody, and welcome back to class. In today's video, we're going to finish up Descartes' Meditations, finally, and talk about Meditations 4 and 6. Now, up to this point, what we have studied is we've looked at Nietzsche. That's another video I'm recording today. Well, Meditation 4 is where Descartes addresses whether or not God is a deceiver. And the meditation actually starts off very quickly, very easily saying, no, God is not a deceiver. He gives us no reason, no logic, no evidence for it. He just goes, now that we know God is perfect, God can't be the deceiver because perfection would mean honesty. And if God is perfect, God couldn't be a deceiver because deception is an imperfect trait. Therefore, God can't be the deceiver. He claims to know this clearly and distinctly. These appear to be more rationalist ideas that he has, this idea that deception has to be an imperfect quality rather than a perfect one. And so because God is perfect, God can't be the deceiver. He gets this done and out of the way in Meditation 4 right at the start. So then where does that leave us? How then do we become deceived? Why can we still not trust our senses? Who makes our mistakes? Why is it that when we walk into a room with a scented candle, we might think that there are cookies? Why is it when we see a shadowy figure in the corner, we mistake our coat rack for a murderer? Why is it when my cat runs around the house at 3 a.m, I think there's a demon? Who deceives us here? Well, Descartes actually says it's a pretty simple answer. So according to Descartes, God gave us two things. He gave us what was known as judgment and free will. It's the relationship between judgment and free will that are what causes us to make mistakes under Descartes' logic. So our judgment, these are our perceptions. These are our abilities to use our five senses to look around the world and to judge things about the things that we perceive. So when I see a dark shape in the corner, my judgments are the options that my mind tells me it could be. They're essentially my perceptions and then the logical conclusions that I come up with about those perceptions. My mind tells me, well, it could be my coat rack, it could be a murderer, it could be a demon, it could be a shadowy figure. When I go into a house with a smelly candle and I smell cookies, my brain tells me, well, you smell cookies. What could that be? And tells me what the options are. My judgments are my ability to make a guess as to what the senses are trying to tell me. My free will is my ability to choose which of these options is correct. And when we put the two of them together without proper time, essentially when we rush to a conclusion, what is called a rash judgment, we make mistakes. Because according to Descartes, we have unlimited free will. We have perfect free will. God gave us perfect free will, unlimited. We can choose to do anything that we want to do. But God also gave us limited perception. We only know that which we perceive. We only know that which we can experience from the five senses about the external world. So when I walk into a house and smell cookies, I don't know that there is a candle there that smells like cookies. Instead, I know what my five senses have told me, which is that there is an aroma that smells like cookies. So with that perception, I can now make a conclusion. I can say that there are cookies here, or there's something in here that smells like cookies. But I'm not going to immediately jump to the idea of candle. Instead, with the evidence that I've been given from my limited perceptions, I'm going to jump to the conclusion of cookies. And in doing so, I've now made a mistake. When I see a shadowy figure in the corner of the room, I see something in the shape of a man. I'm alone. I'm scared. And so my brain tells me there's something that looks like a man in the corner. My brain might also tell me that's where your coat rack is. It might not, because fear does play, again, tricks on the mind. And so in that moment, we might jump to a particular conclusion and choose with our unlimited perfect free will, that's a man, and then attack our coat rack. This, according to Descartes, is how we make mistakes. God doesn't trick us. God doesn't deceive us. The senses don't deceive us. In fact, the senses tell us the correct, accurate information. Our sense of sight tells us there is something that looks like a man in the corner. That's not wrong. Our sense of smell tells us there's something that smells like cookies. That's not wrong. Instead, we are the ones who make the mistakes. We play ourselves, essentially. We come to false conclusions with bad information. When it comes to making mistakes, we're the ones who do it. We make rash conclusions, we jump to quick answers, not thinking about it, and that's why we make mistakes. The senses don't do it. In saying this, Descartes has essentially now said, well, I can trust the five senses again. And there's an example, actually, that I typically do in my in-person class that I think works really well here. It's, imagine you're driving down a country road in the middle of the night. Now, some of you may have done this before, some of you might not have. If you've never done this before, driving down a country road in the middle of the night is terrifying because there are no lights. You cannot see anything around the car except for what your headlights illuminate. Imagine that the car is your body. That's what the car symbolizes. The car symbolizes you as a person. The headlights illuminating the world in front of you, those are your five senses. Now, there is a world out there around you in the darkness, and you have the ability as the driver to turn the car in any direction, to have your headlights illuminate with your five senses the dark, dark world around you. But you don't know what's in those directions. So you can take your senses anywhere you want. You can jump to a conclusion at any point that you want, but you'll only know things as being right or wrong once you can test them with the five senses. So yeah, you're driving down the country road. You can see that there is a road continually in front of you. That's illuminated. Your senses tell you that. But you want to believe that maybe there's a road to the left. And so you, with your perfect unlimited free will, because again, we can choose to do or believe anything, you turn the car to the left. It's only then after you've turned the car to the left that your headlights illuminate a cliff face and you see that that was the wrong choice to make. This is what happens when we jump to rash conclusions with the senses, say with the smell of the candle or with the dark figure in the corner. Our senses told us one thing, and rather than investigating or trying to figure it out calmly, rationally, we use our free will to jump to a conclusion. And that's how we make mistakes. So that's meditation 4 for Descartes. Now going over to meditation 6, Descartes continues this line of thinking, and he says, okay, well, we now know that God isn't a deceiver, that I'm the reason why I make mistakes. So can I trust my five senses again? Hell yes, I can. And because I can trust my five senses, is there an external world around me? He immediately does want to say yes, but there is one thing he has to answer first. And that's the idea of, is there an external world? You know, how do I know that I'm not just making it up in my mind, that my senses are real, but my senses are a figment of my imagination or something like that? And the answer he comes to is pretty good. It's the idea of an involuntary sensations. He says that, well, I won't really know for certain, but involuntary sensations like getting hit when I'm not expecting it to or something like that allow for us to argue that there is something external to ourselves. It's something we're not expecting. Yes, our brains could be deceiving us because nowadays, I mean, we know about delusions and hallucinations and these types of things. So we know that our brains can play powerful tricks on us where we can see and smell and feel things that just aren't there. But Descartes wants to argue that these involuntary sensations are good enough evidence to prove that there has to be some form of external world outside of us, and that our senses are the doorway to that world. It is the doorway that allows for us to understand and know that that world exists. So a good example of involuntary sensations is if you've ever been outside in the middle of the summer and you're talking to a friend in a parking lot and it's hot and it's sweaty and you just want to lean on something, you go to lean on your car. It's hot, you're not expecting it. Or maybe you're jumping into the car real quick and you want to get the AC on, and so you turn on the AC, you go to grab the seatbelt, and what happens? You grab the metal part of the seatbelt and your hand goes and it burns. You're not expecting that. So that would be the type of involuntary sensation that Descartes is talking about here. And so that's the type of involuntary sensation he says demonstrates to us that there is an external world around us. And that's it. That's the meditations. Because at this point, Descartes has now proven that he can trust his senses. We're the reason we make mistakes. But now in meditation 6, he's brought back the senses and he's brought back the external world. So we started here. We got rid of everything along the way. We got rid of the senses, the external world, God, and then got to the bottom and said, what about ourselves? And then we started to go, well, no, we can't disprove ourselves, cogito ergo sum. So we built our way back up and went, well, what about God? And we proved God. And what about the senses and the external world? And we proved those, going back up. So we started in one place and ended up right back where we began. As mentioned before, some people are very skeptical as to whether Descartes actually accomplished everything in the meditations that he says he does. You know, the cogito is really the one thing everybody pretty much agrees on. Yeah, that part's true. Cogito ergo sum, I think therefore am. I can't doubt my own existence if I'm a thinking being. Like, if I can think, I have to exist. That we can't prove wrong, that we can't really have issue with. But kind of everything else in the Meditations, people, one point or another, have an issue with. People have issues with his arguments on God. People have issues with his arguments on why we make mistakes, which honestly, to me, actually makes logical sense, at least. You know, the idea that we jump to conclusions, we're the ones who trick ourselves, that makes sense from a psychological standpoint to me. Maybe not with the exact logic Descartes gave, but we can see how that does serve as a foundation to evolve into further psychological or neurological studies, especially with what we know now about sensations and perceptions and electronic impulses in our brains and hormones. It does serve as a good foundation there. But there are issues people have with his arguments on why we make mistakes, and there are issues on people have with his explanation of the external world. But Descartes' legacy goes beyond the Meditations. Descartes' legacy really breaks down into three things. The first of which we talked about way back when, and it's what's known as Cartesian skepticism. Now, Cartesian skepticism is Descartes' version of skepticism, where you question everything, you get rid of anything you can't know for certain. If you can doubt it, then you have to be skeptical about it. This version of skepticism is very popular, it's very well known, and it is attributed to Descartes. That's why we call it Cartesian. It is Cartesian skepticism. That's one of his legacies from the Meditations. Another one of the legacies is the idea of the mind-body problem. What Descartes does here in the Meditations is he establishes a distinct relationship between the mind, the consciousness, and the physical body, and how these two things work in tandem to experience the external world. According to Descartes' understanding of the mind-body problem, Descartes believes that we are creatures of both mind and body. This is what we call dualism. We have both mind and body. But Descartes' version of dualism essentially argues that as creatures of mind and body, we need both to experience really the external world. But Descartes argues that we don't need both to survive, that the mind is what makes us up. Because the mind-body problem essentially argues and asks, what is the relationship between the mind and the body? So what is the relationship between our consciousness and our physical self? Do we need both the mind and the body to exist? Does the mind need the body? Does the body need the mind? And in how you answer this question, you'll either side with Descartes or you'll side with other philosophers like Locke or Hume, etc. But how you handle this mind-body problem is a very interesting idea of how you think about consciousness and the world that we live in. The reason why many of you are so familiar with Descartes' philosophy is because his idea on dualism, this idea that we're creatures of both mind and body, but we only need the mind to survive, is because you've seen it before. You've seen it in movies like The Matrix or Transcendence or Ghost in the Shell, where the mind is all that's needed for you to survive. It needs a body, yes, to experience and influence the external world, but the mind is all that's needed to survive. So like in Ghost in the Shell, you can take the consciousness out and put it in another vessel. But the body isn't what's important. The body is fleeting. The body can be changed. It's the mind that's needed. Matrix is the same thing. The mind exists separate from the body. This is why they can upload their consciousness into the simulation, and why Neo's mind can get lost in the simulation separate from his body. So it's one of these things. Do you need both to survive? It plays with this mind-body problem that Descartes very much brings up here. And Descartes' version of dualism, again, says that we are creatures of mind and body. We need the body to experience and live in the physical world. We need a body to technically survive. But if the consciousness could be uploaded into some other form or into some other body, then this body wouldn't be needed. The consciousness is all that has to persist for you to persist. So this is, again, one of his other legacies from the Meditations. And then lastly, we get what is known as rationalism and empiricism. This debate that is forever going in the modern period. Descartes is a rationalist. And what this means is that there are some truths, there is some knowledge that we do not need experience. We do not need experience to learn. And this is, again, where how he defines God exists in the third meditation. He says that he just knows God is perfect, because that is a rationalist idea. He knows it without needing experience for it. And so this becomes a very big debate in the modern period, and it's what we'll look at in our next lesson. We'll look at the debate between rationalists and empiricists. Rationalists argue that there are some truths that exist outside of outside of experiential evidence. And then you have empiricists who argue that all knowledge comes from experience. You need experience for there to be knowledge to exist. And so we'll look at this in the next lecture. Well, thank you all so much for coming into class today. I hope you've really enjoyed this. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and I hope you've enjoyed getting to the end of Descartes. Go back and reread it, or go back and listen to these videos again and try to absorb the lessons of the meditations from start to finish. Put them in order and see what you really think of it, because the meditations are an interesting thing when you look at the arguments he puts together from start to finish, how he combines all of these things. But thank you guys for coming in. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to my ramblings about Descartes. What are your thoughts on the mind-body problem, on the idea of consciousness and the body? Because this is something we're going to explore going forward. But see you in the next video, everybody. Bye.